So hi, I've got no live code, so it's not going to be as impressive as Jack's presentation. So this is the Wikipedia definition for, or just the beginning paragraph bit for web accessibility. I think the most important part here to take away is that all users should have equal access to information and functionality. So it's quite interesting when you actually look at the numbers. I mean, this is particularly for visually impaired users, and the survey, this comes from a survey done in 2012. I think, obviously, as the population climbs, the numbers change, but it's a pretty good estimate. And a lot of these people are going to have so much sort of trouble consuming some of the things that we build. We build amazing things most of the time. And we just forget these little things that will make it easier for some people who use assistive technologies to access the web. We can make it a lot easier for it, and we forget that not everyone can interpret color the same. People have trouble reading. People don't use a mouse or any sort of pointing device. So the current state of accessibility, from my point of view, isn't quite right. For those of you who aren't educated in the Star Wars universe, that is not C-3PO on those earbuds. That is the Star Wars universe most overrated character, Boba Fett. It kind of feels like a job half done. And there's always excuses. We kind of, who here works in an agency where they've worked with several project managers, or they work with tight timelines and budgets. Anytime that I've mentioned accessibility in those environments, I've always been told, oh, we don't need to worry about screen reader users or people using other assisted technologies, or we haven't got the time to do it, we haven't got the budget. But realistically, I feel like it's quite a responsible thing to try and do. We need to address these issues because we've just come through years of being told that we need to make sure we do like the responsive design, mobile first, and we need to make our files smaller and faster because that's the responsible thing to do, not because it's a new fad, but because, getting our sites to as many different screens in as many different places as fast as possible is a good thing. So for me, my point of view is that accessibility is just usability. We take a few things on board. It shouldn't be thought of as a feature. It shouldn't be thought of as a nice to have. I've been told that several times, that accessibility is just a nice to have. So my name's Shaun. I recently started at Batika.com, and I'm sort of currently putting in place the building blocks that will hopefully move their product over to React. And whilst I was doing that, I looked at the accessibility of the current site, and it kind of felt a bit like the third installment of the Half-Life gaming series. Like it's not going to have, it doesn't exist at all. And I'm not here to make you feel bad at all. I'm by no means an authority on accessibility. It's just a subject that I feel quite excited about. It's sort of something that's quite new. It's something that I enjoy investigating and understanding how it is. And I suppose I'm kind of morally conscious about accessibility just because I believe that the internet's such an amazing thing and it connects us all. Yeah, some people get left in the dark and forgotten about a little bit. And I just wanted to share some of the things that I sort of learned while I've been doing that. So there are some quick wins. Every developer likes those. Alt tags. This is like, even W3 Schools has a thing about alt tags. So that's how kind of like easy it is. But so often I've been asked to help out on a site who's just got a WCAG 2.0 report, and they're failing on a bunch of stuff, and they're missing alt tags. And I see a lot of sites still missing them. So if you don't know, just really quickly, the top alt tag there, if you've got an image that's purely presentational and has no relation to the comment, still use an alt tag and just leave it as an empty string. And then that way, assistive technologies will know to skip over that. If it is part of the content, use an alt tag and try to make it meaningful. And I know that as developers, we kind of have trouble naming things sometimes, so you can just ask like a copywriter or someone to help you out with that. Labels. Tables are awesome, but when you're marking up a form, it's probably not the best way to do it. And it sounds unrealistic, and I'm pretty sure no one here has ever done that. But I've seen that on the web is where the example comes from. You can just use labels, and I'll show you in a bit how you can hide those labels for people who don't need them. You know, if your design doesn't require a label, still use it, and you can associate label to the input field, just using the for and the ID. My notes here said, don't make things difficult. I kind of want to say, don't be a douche. If you're going to pop up a modal the minute I land on your blog post, for some reason, make sure I can close it. Like I said, you know, one, I couldn't even focus onto this with a keyboard, and I'll talk about keyboard accessibility a lot. But two, I couldn't even see the X to close it, and I like to think I'm a pretty able-sighted person. If you can't see it, it was up in the corner, and it looks like that. Honestly, it took me a while to find. And I couldn't hit outside of the modal or things like that. Yeah, just don't be a douchebag. And going back to that, I can understand that some designers will come up with that, but just it's kind of like our role to help inform people about this as well. So there are a lot of different things to think about when you're approaching accessibility. There's the visual issues, that's including like color contrast and things, and people who can't see correctly, whether they can see at all. There are motor issues, so people who can't use a mouse or any other pointing device. There are quite a few pointing devices, in fact. There's auditory, there's seizures that can be caused by if you're doing like a flashy WebGL site that's flicking images, or even if you've got a carousel that sort of automatically starts rotating and goes pretty well, that can cause issues. And there's cognitive ones, people who suffer with dyslexia or any sort of other cognitive issue where they can't sort of understand content. There's a lot of interesting research around usage of fonts and line heights and white spacing in typography that are very interesting to read. I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm going to pick some of the ones that I've used or I think I understand a lot more than the others. And the first one is keyboard accessibility. So you might have seen this, the Virgin America site that's currently playing a GIF of someone trying to navigate around that site with a keyboard, and you have no idea where you are, even and you can click anything, and if you're just using a keyboard, this site's no good. And I kind of think that what good are our like super fast gzipped, jank-free, parallax scrolling, super silky smooth websites if someone who isn't using a mouse can't access them? So don't do this. I know designers hate the highlighted blue outline that you get when you focus on an element. You don't need to keep that highlighted blue outline. What you should probably do is just give focus the same treatment as hover on an element. So hover on a link. And if it doesn't have one, you need to inform that you need one. You know, as someone who uses a keyboard a lot to navigate, I need to know where I am on the page, and so do a lot of other people. Vim users don't use keyboards. Jack can confirm this. He doesn't use a mouse, sorry. He does use a keyboard, he uses keyboard only. And like I said, I find myself using keyboard-only navigation in a lot of places, and that's simply because, it's not because I have a prejudice against mice or anything, but I find it a lot easier. It's kind of muscle memory. The sites that I use regularly have keyboard navigation enabled. The problem is, as you can see here, I can't focus on the mode, or like it's been thought of a little bit, like I can tab round, the little focus outline is working a little bit, but it's not completely foolproof. Like I can't as a keyboard-only user, I don't know how to click on a photo and get to leave a comment or click like. So I think that's a little bit of an issue. That's kind of what I'm going on about. And if we're going to share our code, and this is one of the cool things about things like React, is that we can create these little components and we can share them with each other. We're going to need to keep in mind something. And no one ever said that, but I do think it's kind of true that if we are going to share these things, we have to sort of take a little bit of ownership, not abandon our GitHub repos and just leave them there for 2 years, or not accept pull requests that make our code a little bit better. And yeah, so even carousels can have accessible. This is one I saw just recently, and it's a really, really nice carousel, really nice component, but you can't have navigation to it. And as a keyboard user, so you know, I would expect myself to be able to tab into the carousel, use the left and right arrow keys to navigate the carousel, and also tab to any of the indicators and click those to slide to the carousel. The good news is React and accessibility, they're like totally best friends. We just need to make sure that we're just doing some things that make sure the friendship stays that way. Good old HTML. Using Semantic HTML gives us a lot for free. Using a button when it should be a button, using a link when it should be a link. They give us, when those elements are rendered to the accessibility tree, you get a lot of things for free. Assistive technology knows how to deal with those things. But if for whatever reason you can't use a button and you need to make a button from a span, this span has a click handler. That's cool. It will work for someone who can use a mouse. But if you try tabbing onto a page with this span, you're getting nowhere. The spans and divs, they're kind of neutrally semantic neutral. You know, they don't mean anything. So they're not inserted into the tabbing order of the page. ARIA. ARIA allows us to expand HTML's vocabulary and allows for custom elements to communicate via assistive technology. So you can use, my example is using a span, but if you were creating a custom element or if you use another element that wasn't in the tabbing order, you can start using ARIA to expand that element and allow assistive technology to use it. So if we give we can give our span some focus using tab index. And I used to find tab index or the idea of tab index quite confusing because it was like, is everything tab index 1? Is everything tab index, do we order it? You can do. So tab index 0 just puts the element into the natural tabbing order of the page. And that's sorted out in the accessibility tree, which I'll show you in a bit, and sort of done via hierarchies. You can use tab index. The minute you use a positive integer in tab index, you then have to start managing tab index. And on a single page, maybe that's all right. But on a big page or a big application, that can get a little bit out of control. And what you can also do is you can use a negative integer. So you could just -0, and that allows you to programmatically apply tabbing to that. So you might have another link that allows you to skip to somewhere else. If that somewhere else has a tab index of -0, it will be in the it will be focused onto that. So what we also want to do is we can use ARIA role to indicate the purpose of the element. So when a user focuses on it, they'll be told that it's a button, and that sort of sets up some expectations from the user. They kind of know how to interact with a button because that's a native HTML element, and the accessibility tree knows how to treat that. But what they do also expect is that you can hit space or enter to click on that button on their keyboard. So we're not done yet. Just because we've used ARIA role, it doesn't give us the default controls that the user expects with a button. So we can also just handle keyboard interaction. So you can write the function for your component to handle the keyboard function. Like I said, for a button, it's space and index. You can actually use the ARIA roles list to find out what the actual expectations are for different types of roles. You can ignore a bunch of these because they're kind of behind the scenes ones. And if you visit the W3org list there, I mean, it's who's tried to read a W3 spec? It's not nighttime. Well, it is nighttime reading if you want to sleep, but it's really useful. I think these ones are really useful. I learned a lot just for going through the list of the different types of roles. A lot of these probably look familiar to you because popular UI frameworks like jQuery UI, Bootstrap, Foundation, in their documentation, you tend to see a lot of these roles and stuff sprinkled about and maybe not completely explained. So again, you might want to refer to the W3 specs. And there are also states and properties, ARIA states and properties. So they kind of define the current state and condition of things. You can have properties like ARIA label and ARIA label by. ARIA label takes a string, which will be read aloud when the user focuses on it. ARIA label by is a reference, an ID reference to, so if you want a form field to be labeled by, or if you want a form group to be labeled by the H2 that's above it, you just pass in the ID. These things generally don't change, so it's kind of like the way that I think about it is these don't change in the sort of life cycle of your component. But you get things like states that definitely do change. So you've got things here like ARIA checked and disabled. So if you know that when you check a checkbox, there's a HTML sort of property called checked that you can use. You should also use the ARIA checked and unchecked ones. These don't get changed. Unlike the native HTML ones, these don't get changed when you check and checkbox. You have to programmatically change them, and it's done like that. So I was trying to think of a good use for ARIA states, and the one that I came up with recently is that I've been building the new shopping cart for Botica at the moment, and I needed a way to let the screen reader know that the cart has been updated and how many items were in the cart anytime a user clicked add to cart for an item. So for this, I'm using Flux at the moment. It was kind of like just a proof of concept. It's not the thing that's going to end up live on the site. And what you can do is you can use this live region, and you can hide this for visual users. But what I use here is ARIA live assertive, and that just says when you finish speaking anything that you're speaking at the moment and this needs to be executed, just wait. There are different levels that you can check out. ARIA assertive is pretty standard. And ARIA atomic equals true just means read out everything within this element. You can set it to false and it will read out only the thing that's changed. But for my case, all I was doing here was anytime someone added something to the cart, I would just send into the state, update the store to be this, and it would read out cart updated. You have X items in cart. And I'm sure it can be extended and changed a little bit to be a bit nicer, but for me, I think it would make a real difference, especially on most sites. If you ever try to use a screen reader, it's really not easy to know when something's been added to the cart, even on popular sites. It's just not simple, so I think it would make a nice difference. Loads of UI frameworks use this screen reader only, and it kind of just hides anything you don't want to show to a visual user, but needs to be there. So when we want to hide our labels because the designer hasn't put labels in their forms, or when we want to hide our live region because maybe the user doesn't need to know when the cart's been updated and things like that. This is a pretty standard way of removing stuff from the visual user, but not removing it from the assistive technology, the tree that it creates. That's quite important. So jQuery UI has some really good standards when it comes to accessibility. If you ever get stuck on on like the accessibility of a component you might be making, it's really worth checking out everything that they make, because they take accessibility quite seriously, and I think it's something that can be adopted from anyone. You can write tests for accessibility. You can test for really simple things like labels and roles. You can go a little bit further in testing, but testing that all the images have alt tags before you sort of send out something is just a really simple little test, and we all love tests, right? So, at ReactConf, there was a presentation of this. I'm sure people have seen it. It's really cool. I'm not a big fan of having to include it into my code base for it to run. I think it would be a better sort of ES hint type plugin. But it is really handy. It's really handy to sort of start understanding a little bit about accessibility roles and things like that. It chucks you errors when you haven't added a keyboard handler for a click and things like that. You can run an audit on your page, much like you might run a performance audit using this Chrome Accessibility Developer Toolbar. It gives you a bunch of nice reports, again, just very similar to the React A11Y. You can do nice things with it, like when you're inspecting an element, you get this new tab over here, which tells you the accessibility properties, and it tells you like what will happen and what type of, and what will actually be spoken out and things like that. So if you don't want to turn on your screen reader, you can sort of use this. It is really, I really encourage everyone to try and use a screen reader on a site though. So I've spoken a bit about the accessibility tree, which is different from the rendered DOM tree. This is what it looks like in Chrome. You can use Chrome / accessibility, and yes, it looks crazy at the moment, but I wouldn't recommend diving into this straight away. But once you want to start getting into programmatically changing accessibility things, you might want to look at this. And it's cool that it's in the tools. Is AccessLint, which gives a nice report back on any sort of live site URL, and it gives you sort of like nice information on how you might change your code to be more accessible. Audit is like this is Tenon, and you can get an audit report, but it's actually got an API, so you could build it into your CI if you were using that to get an accessibility report back. So in terms of resources, W3org, ARIA specs are really, they're not they're interesting, but they're not like Hunger Games interesting. But they're worth reading. They're definitely worth referencing to, and you kind of just get used to looking for certain types of roles and things like that. There's the A11yproject.com, which is a community-built resource hub, and they break down a lot of things to be really understandable. It kind of feels like it's been abandoned for a while, but I'm not too sure. Facebook recently released an accessibility toolkit, which goes through like all their processes and how they treat accessibility on not just the web, but for their mobile apps as well. And Google have a very similar sort of toolkit as well. There are a bunch of talks that are really, really worth listening to. Marcy Sutton's JavaScript for Everyone was kind of the talk from JSConf EU that I think was the most interesting talk last year. Leonie Watson is a great speaker. She speaks a lot about ARIA and accessibility on the web. That's just a particular one I picked out. Jorn from the jQuery Foundation did a talk called Talk to Me. That's more about screen readers and things like that. And there was accessibility as a feature you can build. I made like a little talk playlist if anyone wants. There's more than just those ones for accessibility talks. I think they're worth checking out. And so, yeah, that's it. I think it would be cool if we kind of started treating everything a bit more, accessibility first as well as mobile first and everything else first. Thanks.
Thank you, Shaun. Any questions? Do you want to take questions? Any questions?
as long as they're easy questions.
I like the same topic as you, but the problem I had is every screen reader is extremely expensive. So how did you solve have you ever saw a person using a screen reader, or did you buy one of those screen readers to test yourself?
No, so the one that I use is the one that comes with, you won't be able to hear it, but it's the one that comes with Mac, and you can, oh, you can't see it either. That's the Braille output, and that's the screen reader output. So there's Command F5, free screen reader. There's a screen reader on your iPhone, on your Android. There's NVDA for Windows, which I don't know if that costs. But there's also JAWS for Windows, which does cost money unless you just don't mind restarting the screen reader every 30 minutes to test it. And for me, it's kind of a cool, like, you know, I'm willing to do that in order not to pay for it. But yes, they are expensive. I believe JAWS is the most popular on Windows. I don't know what there is for Ubuntu Linux distros, but I believe it does come with a screen reader anyway, as well, built into the OS, or it might be just an install for that. But I've never paid for a screen reader because I just use the built-in one.
Hi. I find that convincing people who run companies to do accessibility is difficult, but doable. Convincing my colleagues who are like coding alongside with me is practically impossible in some circumstances. So I was wondering how you deal with that and what tips you might have.
Have you ever seen like a Gordon Ramsay Hell's Kitchen episode where he just screams at people till they do something the way that he thinks, the way is right because it makes them a better chef? No, you don't have to scream abuse. Yeah, no, it is really impossible. I mean, this is kind of like one of the reasons that I think these talks are, you know, a lot of these talks get given at accessibility conferences, and you don't see a lot. I mean, there have been in the last year, there's been a lot of, at least one accessibility talk at conferences. You know, it's going to be difficult. People are generally human nature to be difficult, and I just do it by default. That's kind of my thing, is like ask for forgiveness before you ask for permission. It's the same with when people were doing, when responsive design was like a new thing, and I just started doing it by default, and my managers would have a go at me because they wanted to charge more for it. And I was like, no, because it's the responsible thing to do it by default. And so I just set my mindset to it and kind of hoped that that attitude would just be like a natural, oh, Shaun's adding roles to things, maybe I should be adding roles to things. Kind of make them feel bad, but without being Gordon Ramsay about it. So, like I said, I would just start doing it. I would just like add roles or refuse pull requests to code bases and just write in the comments.
Sorry, yeah, that makes total sense. I was just saying lead by example seems to be what you do, which sounds great.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, lead by example, yeah. I think is the best thing to do.
Add it to the definition of done.
You can also make tests fail if they don't add accessibility. They can't commit to the code base if it fails.
Hi. So my question would be that, do you include accessibility testers in your process?
At the moment, no, because like I said, Patika.com has zero accessibility. But yes, I'm definitely interested in looking at things like Tenon and just generally making it part of the test process. Is the accessibility, checking for roles, checking for alt tags and things like that.
Yeah, sorry, I meant testers. So people with visual impairment and other.
I mean, yeah, where I work, we have QAs and stuff. Again, I'm trying to lead by example, so I have to influence them to test some accessibility stuff.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great. Thank you very much, Shaun. It's really good.